Not too long ago, I received a bee specimen from this manor, and it was the exact rare bee species.
I was kind of disappointed with Natise because there is no continuation of the Ashes of Memory. Well, since there is no continuation of it, I decided to research Melly instead, as many of you guys requested that I do so. So, what is the story of Melly Planius? Check out everything in the video. Melly Planius was one of 42 survivors in Identity 5, whose role was the Entomologist. Her name originated from a Greek word, Melly, which could mean bee or honey. As for her surname Plinius, it possibly originated from Gaius Plinius Secundus, which was a Roman naturalist during ancient times. At the time of the final game, which was in 1902, Melly was 28 years old. That could suggest that she was born in 1874. She was born into a poor family in a certain village. Her mother's name, which is Anna Endlovu, suggests that Melly's maiden name was Melly Endlovu, though this would be confusing, since Endlovu was a common surname among native peoples of the eastern and southern parts of Africa. Melly herself was identified as an Eastern European by Alice, which could raise a suspicion that Melly was of a mixed race.
She has a tall and toned figure, so she's either of Eastern European descent or engages in outdoor activities all year round.
Melly's life prior to marriage can be found in her first birthday letter. According to the villagers, Melly led her childhood life unhappily because her parents put too much pressure on her, even to the point of calling her an old maiden. Despite that, their parents seem to not be able to identify her unhappiness. This would indicate that her parents are strict and only obsessed with themselves, with inadequate time to spend on Melly, much less on understanding her emotions or needs. Melly eventually worked in a certain manner as a servant. By doing this, she could send some earnings back home to her parents. Still referring to her first letter, her parents seem to care about her a lot, but also rely heavily on her as a source of income. It was during this time that Melly started studying entomology. Her letter indicated that she had fallen in love with the manor owner, Joshua Plinius. At around this time, Joshua Plinius was a famous biologist. Melly would then sneak into his study room to study a lot about insects in order to have something to talk about with Joshua. She sent words about this to her parents, which worried them deeply. Her mother even expressed her worry about Melly losing her jobs if she kept on studying about insects while neglecting her servant jobs. Again, this would indicate that her parents do not understand her much and are somewhat old-fashioned by valuing a woman just for something they can do at home, doing chores, taking care of the house, and so on. Melly would continue to study insects. Personally, I think that it was around this time that she developed a real feeling about entomology, and not only as a way to talk with Joshua. Both would fall in love with insects and eventually with each other. Later, they get married. We all know that Melly's marriage life was not going smoothly. This can be tracked in her deduction notes. from the deduction notes, it is implied that Melly's and Joshua's marriage life was once full of happiness. However, things went sour as time went on, as Melly would need sleeping pills to cope with her life. Why did she even need sleeping pills? It might be because she was having an unhappy time with Joshua and wanted to avoid him. Then we see the next deduction note, implying that Joshua is complaining to Melly about her being stuck in her own ways. To this, I would like to think that it means Melly is always busy with herself, that she is stuck in her own way of life or her beliefs. Remember that Melly developed a desire to study entomology and that she has old-fashioned parents. This would make Melly dislike being told what to do and instead always want to do anything in her own way. But remember, because Melly has already been married, there are things that should change. First of all, in the Victorian era, women were expected more to perform motherly duties than to seek education. Even women who were not successful in finding husbands were generally expected to remain without university degrees. This would be contrary to Melly, who, at this point, had already developed a strong interest in entomology. She's stuck in her own ways of being free to do whatever she wants instead of starting to change and perform her wife's duties. Second, in the Victorian era, a wife's place in the family hierarchy was secondary to that of her husband. Connecting this with Melly's interest in entomology, it is clear enough that their marriage would end unhappily. Melly would want her husband to acknowledge her knowledge equally rather than beneath him. She wanted to be seen as a study partner as well as a life partner, yet her husband failed to realize that, thus making him angry whenever Melly tried to study. And then we have this one deduction note, mentioning a separation agreement, stating that both parties are legally separated. It is interesting to note that a separation agreement is different from a legal divorce. To put it simply, a separation agreement dictates how spouses handle their affairs during separation. Based on this, I would like to think that Melly and Joshua were not divorced, at least not yet. This could explain why Melly still retains her marriage name, even if someone who is divorced can choose whether to keep their marriage name or return to their maiden name. This would also explain the next deduction note, mentioning that Joshua looked angrily at Melly at the dining table, meaning that they are still together. Then there is one deduction note. How will I face the rest of my years with so much missing in my life? According to a theory I read, this note implies that Melly was tired of being restricted in doing everything she loved, first by her parents and now by her husband. Right after that, the deduction note mentioned her being surrounded by a swarm of bees and her stating, "I know what will grant me eternal joy within my mind." For me, it is certain that at this point, Melly has already made up her mind to kill her husband. This would be supported by her last deduction note. In Ashes of Memory 2, we all saw the newspaper article about Joshua's death. If you look closely, there is an interesting subheading in it mentioning a possible assassination, as if Natiz tried to tell us something about a murder. It is never stated explicitly that Melly killed her husband, but considering that her husband's death was because of the venom of a rare type of bee, it seems to me that it was the only possible option. After all, for someone who is an expert in entomology, finding a rare type of bee is not a hard task to do for her. To support this theory, we can concur with the Orfeo event. Melly always leaves in a hurry whenever the player claims to be the detective, as if afraid that her crime will be exposed. It It is also interesting to note that in Ashes of Memory PV, there is a certain bee that is shown. If you look closely, you can see the Latin name of the bee, which is Apias mellifera scutellata, or East African lowland honeybee. Connecting the dots with her mother's name, it is possible that Melly obtained the bee from her hometown and hybridized it with other more deadly bees, thus creating a deadly bee that her husband could not record in his research, however meticulous her husband is. Thus, Melly killed her husband by using the bee as a weapon. She may have gotten the bee disposed of soon after. That would make police investigations difficult unless they have an entomologist on the same level as Melly. According to one of the theories I also read, Melly's killing her husband would eventually make her regret her choice. She then becomes more and more distant toward others and indulges herself more and more in her study. This would eventually lead her to cover her face with a veil because she does not even want to see her current self, be it good or bad. Her 2021 deduction question seems to support this theory. Instead of my face underneath this gauze hat, I wish you'd be impressed by my abilities. Furthermore, the description in her newest skin everyday life mentioned that with each passing day, the face beneath the veil became more and more unfamiliar, even to herself. This would suggest that Melly has become someone she does not even recognize anymore. That is, from a poor, innocent girl into an ambitious and selfish woman. That's why Melly would stay away from the manor and keep herself busy studying in the field and keep on wearing a veil. Maybe it's because she tried so hard to accept who she is now, or she tried to forget what she did. After her husband's death, Melly enjoyed the privilege of being alone and obtaining her husband's wealth and fortune. But when everything seems to be a perfect crime for her, she eventually receives an invitation from the Oletus Manor to participate in the death game. Personally, I thought she wouldn't bother with the game, but along with the invitation, she found something that intrigued her so much, a bee species that she used to kill her husband. That would mean that someone knows about her crime, and that this certain someone would possibly blow up her crime if she didn't comply with their request. Another theory is that Melly would come to the manor to shut off or terminate the one who knows about her crime. Either way, Melly has no choice but to accept the invitation, leading to the event on the Ashes of Memory. In the Ashes of Memory 1, we see that Orpheus teased Melly about insects. I would think that Melly would know Orpheus had an evil intention during this one scene, or that Orpheus is the one sending her the invitation. As to why Orpheus teased Melly, I have no idea so far. Though in several sources, Melly seems to try to warn Elise about Orpheus or Norton. Perhaps in Melly's eyes, Alice is unaware of the dangers of Orpheus and those around her, as suggested in Melly's second birthday letter. She doesn't want Alice to share the same fate as her. I want to discuss more about her death game according to the theories, but sadly, as we have no continuation of the main story, we will wait for some more until NetEase finally releases the next part of the Ashes of Memory. Please note that this is just a theory with supporting details. NetEase has not given any official information about her lore, so I am open to discussion to unravel her secrets better. Thank you for watching the video.